this was something that Mark had always envisioned with the guys from Blur Studios as being the tease for the Sinister Six.
Yep.
Embedded in the credits was a sense of what was to come, which I think is brilliant.
Yeah, it's very cool.
Well, this was, I think, if there's one enormous challenge that we faced, having already made the movie, it was the math of the ending and how to get Peter. It's what we've been talking about. How to get Peter from utter, rock bottom, having lost the love of his life, to a place where he can come back and be Spider-Man, because we always knew we had to end this movie with him putting the suit on again. It would be devastating, and it wouldn't be Spider-Man. It would send the wrong message if he gave up. So how do you restore faith? How do you restore hope? And I remember having conversations with Jeff and Alex in the very, very beginning. What is the one thing that could actually buoy him and give him some hope that life is worth living after losing everything? And it was one of those things where it was like literally like, what is it? Well, it would have to be, his father would literally have to come back from the dead, or from wherever we thought he was. And the power of that was something we all really fell in love with. Probably the only person in his life who could pick him up off the ground. And so these guys wrote that scene and we shot it. And it was one of the most spectacular days I've ever been around on a set, in terms of the pure, very raw intensity. I remember Andrew and Campbell Scott, who obviously plays his father, and is a brilliant actor, did not rehearse the scene once. They felt that, and Andrew really felt this, as embodying Peter Parker, that he wanted in that moment when Richard Parker appears, he wanted it to be something he had never felt before. It was real sort of method acting in its purest sense. And so it was a sort of a beautiful snowy day in New York. And we shot this scene where Peter is standing over Gwen's grave and been through the seasons, and it's snowing, and all of a sudden he hears his voice behind him saying, "Peter." And he turns and it's Richard. And at first he's incredulous. You can't fathom that this could be real. And there's this incredible sort of father-son moment where Richard apologizes and Peter just screams at him, "Where have you been? Where have you been? Who are you?" And finally, Richard just embraces him, and you see Peter sort of melt into the arms of his father. And then we transition to a scene of the two of them walking to a bench and sitting there. And Richard describes to Peter that he can't fathom a world in which death, and the death of people like Gwen and the death of people like his wife Mary, where death is meaningless. And that, in fact, Peter is here for some higher reason, and that there must be a reason. And that, in fact, and he delivers the "with great power comes great responsibility" line, and it lands on Peter. And it was beautiful and very, very impactful and powerful.
Also, finally, in that speech, he said to Peter that he'd always thought it was his legacy to make the world a better place, and then finally realized that no, it was Peter who had taken on this ability as Spider-Man, and that now that he had it, he couldn't turn his back on it, which was really empowering. But I think when the audience saw it, they used the logic, they voiced the logic of, well, where was he? How was he hiding for so long? And we had carefully set it up throughout the movie. There was a moment on the plane where Mary said to Richard, "At some point that boy's going to need us, and you have to promise me that we'll be there for him." And the whole spy investigation had really tried to subtly feather in this idea that Richard's body had never been found, perhaps. But the audience used the logic of, well, where was he, to really cover the emotion of, how dare any father stay away from his son for that long? People just on a visceral level couldn't accept that. And I think the other thing that Alex very wisely pointed out was, in a movie that was about somebody growing up, it also, in a way, slightly infantilized Peter in that it took his father to help him get over Gwen's death. The movie finally really allows Peter to overcome his loss himself, as opposed to needing the help of a parent.
It's so tricky because you're trying to measure everything and balance everything against what it means to have Gwen die. And when we started talking about the story, the first thought was, well, the only thing, as Matt just said, that could get you to feel better would be that the death begets a resurrection, so that he at least gets his father back. And that makes a lot of sense. But the problem is that the audience has already gone through the trauma of watching her die and having to process that. And in a weird way, as much as we fought for it and fought for the ending and shot the ending, the first time I saw it, my thought was, this is never going to work, because you can't ask the audience to go through, in a weird way, another trauma.
Yes.
And then, as Matt said, the math of like, wait, so you weren't there, why didn't you show up? And it's one of those weird things where you can't intellectualize it. Like, you as a viewer go, I hate you for not showing up and making your son suffer
No
for
matter
everything
what
he suffered.
your reasons
It
are.
doesn't matter why, I don't care. Like, there's a sort of blinding just truth to, you are the worst father ever. And in fact, rather than being happy about your return, I hate you and I feel worse for Peter.
And we even tried to write to
You know?
that a lot. We,
Yeah.
in anticipation of that problem, we had Richard say things like, I stayed away to keep you safe. They were looking
Right.
for me if I had
But
come
in a
back.
way, and as much
None
as
of
we
it
tried to
mattered.
do that, and as much as he said that up front,
Made it
Andrew was
worse in a way.
right to yell and scream at his
Yes.
father when he showed up, because that's the only rational reaction to a moment like that. And so I think at the end of the day, it really just sort of, in looking at it, it was like, we have made a movie about the death of Gwen Stacy. It needs to remain very simply a movie about the death of Gwen Stacy, and it needs to use the character who has really become his parent in the movie to deliver the message correctly. And we entertained the, like, does Gwen come back as a ghost? Does his father come
Yeah,
back
we
as a
tried
ghost?
everything. We talked about it.
And Mark wisely said, that's bullshit. Like, that's a lot of fakeness. And we can't do that. And that's like not that's not a real ending. And it has to be, we have to watch Peter pull himself out of the mud. He was totally right. And I think an old screenwriting adage is that the simplest answer is always the right one. And I think it's true. I think this just needed to follow a much, much simpler line. It was just too emotionally complicated.
Thanks for listening, and we put a lot of love and care into this movie because we know how much people love Spider-Man and love this universe and have been loving this character for 50 years. And hopefully the experience was a good one for everybody who came out and saw it and who was watching this now.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for listening and watching, everybody.
Thank you all.